no intern today. He died. It wasn't COVID. I backed over him in the parking lot. It was dark. I don't know. 2, 3, 4. Ba da beep ba da da sna. Did it ba beep boop ba da. Did it da 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 da. It's Wednesday. Ha ha yeah. Hi everybody. I went to the comic shop today. Picks of the week. Ba da ba da ba da. My name is Jimmy. You must have read that sign, right? Nope, those are last week's. Here's this week's. All right, so this week was, kind of back to normal. We're all getting a little nervous that California is going to get shut down again, but as long as the distributors are still willing to, or the distributor is still willing to send books out, and now they don't have any DC books they have to worry about, so there's that. Even if they shut the shop down, it'll just go back to how it was at the beginning of the quarantine, where I gotta give the one of the kids that works there $5 every time he brings my comics to me, which is fine. But before that happens, I'm gonna get some reading in this week for sure. So I'll start with this. First up, I've already shown this one off, Year Zero. This is issue number 3. The main reason I'm including it in this week's Picks of the Week is because, for one thing, at this point, what have I been doing this? I've been doing this version of this little web series since the first of this year, and as I thought would happen, I've kind of arrived in a bit of a groove, or a rut, however you want to look at it. So I'm buying pretty much the same books. I'm just going to keep showing you the same books over and over. But look at how good this cover is. That was the main reason I wanted to show this one off. That's the best cover they've had yet. And the covers to this book have been excellent. I, had once upon a time completely OD'd on zombies. I first saw Night of the Living Dead when I was 19 years old, and then that was that. Like, I was super into zombies, specifically the George Romero sort of universe that he created. And it's what I would call unofficial spin-off, like Shaun of the Dead. Or even the Dawn of the Dead remake, which, was not in that universe, but still kind of was. But it was not long after Shaun of the Dead came out that zombies became a huge thing again, and the Zombie Survival Guide became a big bestseller, which Max Brooks wrote the Zombie Survival Guide, and then he wrote World War Z, which I love, because it's an oral history and it's fiction. The Zombie Survival Guide is more of a novelty book. I think I even owned it because I used to work at I either got it through the comic shop I worked at, and I also used to briefly work at a kids' books warehouse. And so through that job, I could special order books and get an employee discount. But I just ended up giving it to my cousin later because I was like, it was an actual survival guide. And I was like, I guess this would work if I don't know. It was a long way to go for a bit. And, my point is, not long after that was when, zombies became a huge thing, and George Romero made several more not-as-good movies, and there was all other kinds of zombie movies, and they're all not very good. I feel that way about horror in general. I'm very, very snobbish when it comes to horror, of all the things that I'm snobbish about. And nowadays, though, it feels like when I do read a zombie book, it's like, oh, this is like how it used to feel, so I guess zombies aren't as popular, and therefore I can like them again. I don't want to live my life like this. I don't want to not like things just because other people do. It's just kind of how I'm wired at this point. And I was not born that way. I rewired myself in 1994, and I don't regret it. Anyway, thanks for tuning into my podcast. Also this week, Giant Size X-Men, Magneto #1. Magneto remains my favorite, most kissable supervillain. These have been a lot of fun too. This is now the third one of these giant size. I mean, it's a $5 cover price for a 48-page book. That's not that giant, if you ask me. Jeez, the old Marvel giant sizes from the 70s were at least 64 pages, right? But this one not only features my favorite mutant, my favorite X-Men character, and my favorite villain. It's also written by Jonathan Hickman, who has obviously become... he's been a favorite writer of mine since The Nightly News was his first book for Image back in 2007, I want to say. But now that he's back at Marvel, because he has not written for Marvel for a little while, and he's totally revamped the X-Men line, it's just been amazing. It's been the best X-Men stuff since Children of the Atom, which is when Brian Bendis started writing it. So, that's a no-brainer. And if I'm not very much mistaken, that is a Fraser Irving cover, which is even hotter. Now I have to double-check that, too. Beep, bop, bop. I shouldn't bag these up before I do this little thing, huh, folks? Ben Oliver is the cover artist. Oh, that's right. Ben Oliver did the cover art for all of it. But he has a Fraser Irving-y vibe to him. And then finally this week, Sacred Six #1 on the Dynamite Publishers label. I keep calling him like it's a record label. Oh, he's dead. So this book is this was a little bit of a bittersweet acquisition this week. I got all excited, I think it was last week or the week before, because every month I have to fill out I have to check off a form. He has a form of all the titles, which ones I want him to pull each week. So, and this was on here, and he had put Christopher Priest's name next to it, so we would know who's writing it. Christopher Priest is one of my absolute favorite comic book writers of all time. Has been since before I knew who he was. When I was a kid, he was the head of he was the group editor for the Spider-Man titles at Marvel Comics. His name was Jim Owsley back then, and he's a protege of Jim Shooter, who was the oft controversial editor-in-chief for Marvel Comics in the 1980s. And despite how, like, if you read that Sean Howe book, there's a lot of... Jim Shooter does not feel like, or does not seem like the sort of guy I would want to work for, but he does definitely seem like the sort of guy who gets things done. And I still, to this day, believe Marvel wouldn't be sitting where it's at today as, like, you know, king of the comic book field, if not for Jim Shooter. So take from that what you will. But if nothing else, even if I'm wrong about that, Jim Shooter is who gave Christopher Priest his break and who trained him to be the kind of comic book creator that he is now. When I really started noticing his work, though, was his run on the Black Panther title in the late 90s, which I had missed at the time, because that was a time where I wasn't really reading any superhero comics at all. I wasn't really reading that many comic books at all. But they recently, it was like in anticipation of the Black Panther movie, a couple years in anticipation, they put back into print all of the Christopher Priest Black Panther stuff. And my friend Frank, who was running the shop that I worked at the time, insisted that he ordered all of them. In fact, I may not have been working there at that time. I think I was working full-time at a comedy club back in San Diego, and I was having to pay for my comic books. But, I mean, I was making okay money. Not much. A little more than I'm making now. This is really... I know that's why you tuned in. And he was right. I was blown away. And everything you've seen on the screen as far as Black Panther goes, mostly Priest stuff. They don't really go back. Obviously, Kirby and Lee are the ones who created the character, and so Wakanda and all that stuff. That's all Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. But that's just the template. The Dora Milaje, I think changing Manape's name going back to M'Baku was him. All that stuff with Killmonger, that's all Christopher Priest. Killmonger had been a Black Panther villain for a long time, but Killmonger's story in the movie, it was very different, but Killmonger as a character in the film, that's more Christopher Priest stuff. Everett Gill, played by Martin Freeman, a character created by Christopher Priest. So, he's a favorite of mine. Now, here's the thing about this book, though. This is called, like I said, Sacred Six. So, earlier this year, or perhaps late last year, Christopher Priest started writing a Vampirella comic for Dynamite. Dynamite owns the licensing to all those old Warren characters. Vampirella was a vampire character from the 70s, published by Warren Publishing, which is, you know, long since gone under, but those characters that are still being licensed, like Dark Horse is reprinting a lot of Warren's eerie and creepy stuff. And I think Vampirella, actually, now that I'm thinking about it too, or maybe Dynamite has that reprint license now, I don't know. So they brought that book back, which they've done several times, you know, in my lifetime, I guess, because that character's from right around when I was born. They brought it back again just recently with Christopher Priest writing it. This is probably the first Christopher Priest book within the last 10 years that I have not bought. Because I don't really like Vampirella. it's not, for one thing, I don't really care for vampires in general. And for another thing, the original owner of the comic shop I used to work for, a big Vampirella fan, and so she was everywhere, and I frankly got sick of looking at her implausible costume. I don't I don't know. She's not on the cover of this. Maybe I can find it. Because the art in this is also by Jay Lee, but I'll get back to that. Vampirella, this is Vampirella's costume. I don't know if you can see it. It's a very ridiculous bikini, and there's no way. It's like Elvira's costume. It's like there's no way that's not scotch taped to her cleavage. Not that I have a problem with Elvira. I want you to know that. So I was like, meh. But then I saw this on the list, and I was like, oh, it's Christopher Priest, give it to me. I didn't realize it was also a Vampirella book. So it's Vampirella. The Sacred Six are Vampirella, Draculina, Pantha, Nyx, Chastity, Lilith. Those are the six, right? Yeah. So those are all Warren characters, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not very familiar with Warren. Warren magazines in the 70s. Why not teach you guys a whole lesson? Warren magazines in the 70s were a distinct throwback to the EC horror comics of the 50s, which I love. And I truly do love that Warren tried to get those, and there was like a resurgence in interest in horror comics in the 70s because the Comics Code Authority lightened their rules on what they could publish. You used to not be able to publish horror comics. That's why Warren started out as a magazine and not a comic book, even though it was a comic magazine. It's so, if you do any reading into the history of comic book publishing, and why wouldn't you? Fascinating, captivating stuff. But so much of that, especially in the 60s and 70s, so much of the medium was shaped by how they were distributed and how they were shipped. And how they were kind of inner policed. The Comics Code Authority was not a government body. It was an industry task force, like the MPAA for movies. And just as irrelevant and ridiculous. So now now the Comics Code Authority doesn't matter. Well, it never mattered, but no one listens to it now. That was Picks of the Week. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. So, yeah, you get my point. I'm not very familiar with the Warren characters. I'm looking forward to this book, though, because it is written by Priest and is drawn by Jay Lee, who I always kind of forget about. Jay Lee is a very highly stylized artist. His style has evolved over the years. He doesn't look the same now as he does then. It's distinctly him, though. He's very Jay Lee. But I've always had a soft spot for Jay Lee, because when I was in high school is when he broke. And I used to read, I think I must have been a sophomore maybe, in high school maybe a junior. But I used to read the Prince Namor book that Marvel put out, which was written and drawn by John Byrne. That was largely why I was buying it. And then when Byrne left that book, I don't remember who they brought in to write it, but they gave it to Jay Lee to draw, because it was like not that great a book. Or, I mean, it wasn't that high selling a book. I loved it. It didn't sell that well, though. And so since Jay Lee was so new, I mean, he was like fresh out of art school. Probably a teenager himself, was much older than I was. They threw it to him, and it was a complete 180 from the direction Byrne had taken it. John Byrne's style is very comic booky. It's very, solid line, and, it's just, you recognize it immediately, John Byrne's work, as being traditional superhero comics. Jay Lee is a different story. Well, from the 90s, he kind of fit in, which is why he broke so hard, because he had this very jagged, very rough sort of line, and he used straw a lot for the so he constantly had a spatter effect to his work, because he would dip the straw at the end of a straw into some ink or white paint, depending on whatever he was trying to do, and then blows in it, and so it creates a spatter effect. And I mean, I was familiar with that technique because I'm vested in art history. I was familiar with that technique, but I'd never seen anybody use it so much, so often, and employ it so well. So he really blew up. But also, that blowing up in comics around that time was kind of like blowing up in the real estate business in 2007. Like, it wasn't, that gravy train was not going to last at all. So I think he was like one of the last big guns to come out of that era of Marvel, or that era of superhero comics at all. He had some stuff with Image here and there. I kind of lost track of him, to be honest with you. But he still pops up and stuff, and so also this. Picks of the week. Picks of last week. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Okay, so. Jumping Jesus. All right. Firstly, I read Empire Fantastic Four number 0 rather. I'm super stoked. I didn't use it for this week, but Empire number 1 came out. So now we are officially underway with that title, with a big Marvel crossover. And to be completely frank with you, as I've made mention several times, I wasn't super into the idea of this crossover at first, and then I realized it was, they're going to fight the Kree-Skrull War, but it's going to be the Kree and the Skrull against Earth, and I went, super, because even in a pandemic, I still want to watch the world burn. But also, because of the pandemic, I think there is a big part of me that just wants more of a sense of normalcy. So, a big, stupid Marvel Comics crossover with a bunch of titles tied into it that I don't normally buy, that I'm going to buy now, and a bunch of mini series that don't really have much bearing on the story. I'm all in, because I just want that much pure escapism, especially because, it's not even close to being over now, so there's that. Speaking of that, I also read Ravencroft 2 and 3. I don't have much more to report back on this one, but it's so much fun. It's really Marvel doing Arkham Asylum, and this is going to sound cattier than I mean to. I'm honestly more used to DC ripping off Marvel than the other way around, and so to see Marvel ripping DC off, because whether or not you like that Joker movie, it did very well, and everyone talked about it for that whole summer last year, and the Black Label stuff that DC's putting out, it seems to be doing pretty well. And even though Marvel is definitely killing it movie-wise, DC does seem to have the more serious stuff like Doom Patrol, and their extended universe is not quite as goofy as Marvel's is, I think, is what they're going for. And all this stupid Arkham Asylum video games that everyone's raved about for the last 10 years. I could give two poops, but... So, what I'm saying is that particular segment of the Batman mythos, the whole Arkham Asylum thing, has had a lot of heat on it for a while. It does not appear to be lightening up anytime soon. So, why wouldn't Marvel try to cash in on that? And I'm glad for it, because it makes for a fun comic book. On a similar track, we have Old Haunts number 1 and 2. This was written by Rob Williams, who has written a ton of stuff, but I was particularly excited to read this because he wrote a very good run on Ghost Rider that I was really into. I thought he'd written some RoboCop books too, but that I liked, but I can't find those, so I might be confusing him with somebody else. Rob Williams is not a very uncommon name in this industry, apparently. So this book, though, is really fun. It's about it's a gangster horror thing, and I like cross-genre stuff like that. So it's these 3 mafia types who are on their way out of the life, but before they go, the skeletons, the bones of all the men they've killed on their rise to the top, have come back to life and are now hunting them down. So it's really fun. And Rob Williams, now that I'm thinking about it, he's the co-writer with this guy named Ollie Masters, who has never done a comic book before. And this is on AWA, which is Axel Alonso's new publisher. Axel Alonso was a big muckety-muck at Marvel Comics for a long time. And I don't remember, he was CEO or CFO or something like that. He was a big guy, corporate-wise. So these are obviously he still has a lot of connections over there. But it feels like this is one of those things where they have a very young, potentially inexperienced writer, new to the industry anyway. So they team him up with a veteran. But I'm under the impression, and this is from, I asked Jonathan Hickman this question, as a matter of fact. Personal friend of mine. No, that's not true. In 2011, I was at the San Diego Comic Book Convention. Is this going to be over 20 minutes, Jimmy? Jeez Louise. Why didn't you... Oh, he's dead. I went to San Diego Comic Book Convention in 2011, and I went to a panel for Jonathan Hickman, and he spoke... At the time, he was writing Fantastic Four, so he talked about that a lot. And this was also around the time... Yeah, he had just kind of broken in Marvel. Like, he had a couple books, fan favorites at Image, but the Fantastic Four run at Marvel Comics is kind of what made him a guy that people would come to a panel to see. And so he had just finished a book, well, I don't know just, but like the year previous, I want to say, called Secret Warriors, which was co-written with Brian Michael Bendis. And Brian Michael Bendis was then the main writer, Marvel's head writer. They don't technically have that title, I don't think, but Bendis was for sure their head writer from the year 2000 until like a couple years ago. So I asked Hickman, I went up to the little microphone and I said, "Hi, Mr. Hickman, I'm a big fan." And I asked him what that entailed exactly. I said, like, how does that work? Like, I was just curious as to what their process was. Do you like write a page and then send it to him? Or do you guys do a whole draft and then exchange notes or whatever? And he goes, no, in this case, it was largely, I just got to put Bendis' name on it. And I was like, oh, all right, that works. So that was one time, but I've ever since have always kind of assumed that was it. It's like, I'm sure Bendis had more to do with the script on that book than he did on any other books that he didn't have his name on. But it was largely Hickman's show, was the impression I got. So that's probably what's going on with Old Hunts here, which probably means I'll look for Ollie Masters stuff in the future. Although it is kind of an unusual name, so maybe I will remember it, but I'll probably just have to wait until I read another one of his books on accident, like I am this time. Maybe Rob Williams' name will be on that. Holy moly, this is going on way too long, but it was nice talking about comics with you guys. Picks up last week. Ba-na, ba-na, ba-na. All right. Where's the... Oh, here they are. So, that's it for this week. Hopefully, I'll get more reading done this week, and I can shoot for a half an hour next week. That's stupid. All right. Well, take care of yourself. I'll see you next time. Ba-da-deep, ba-da-da-da. Stee-deep, ba-ba-deep. This guy's dead. Did I already...